3 months after my husband said he needed space, I stood outside a quiet house across town watching strangers carry his furniture inside. Not our furniture. His furniture. The neighbor who sent me the photo had only written one sentence. "Isn't that your husband?" At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. My husband was supposed to be living alone in a small apartment, thinking about our marriage. That was the story he gave me. But the photo told a different story. In the image, a moving truck sat in front of a white house with tall eucalyptus trees. Two movers carried a leather chair toward the door. And, beside the truck, stood my husband. Tall, calm, giving instructions. Next to him stood a woman I recognized. She held a set of keys. She looked very comfortable, almost like she lived there. That was the moment I understood something painful. The space my husband asked for wasn't about reflection. It was about relocation. But the photo showed more than he realized. And by the time he discovered what it revealed, his entire life had already started collapsing. The strange part? He had no idea I was the one who pulled the first thread. My husband, Alistair Rowan, was the kind of man people admired. He was Australian by birth, though we had lived in the United States for years. Most people knew him as a philanthropist. His foundation funded schools, hospitals, and clean water projects across several countries. Whenever his name appeared in the news, it was always connected to generosity. People often told me how lucky I was. And for many years, I believed that too. Alistair had a calm voice, thoughtful eyes, and a quiet confidence that made people trust him immediately. When we met 10 years earlier at a charity gala, I thought I had found someone truly good. But somewhere in the past year, something in him had changed. He became distant. Short conversations. Late evenings. More travel. At first, I blamed stress. Running a global charity wasn't easy. But then one night he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said something that made my stomach sink. "I think I need some space, Elara." Space? From his wife? From the home we built together? What exactly did that mean? When someone like Alistair asked for space, he didn't shout or argue. He spoke gently, almost kindly. "I just need time to think," he told me. "Think about what?" I asked. "Us." He rubbed his temples, as if the conversation itself was exhausting. "I feel overwhelmed lately." Those words sounded reasonable, but something inside me felt uneasy. "What kind of space?" I asked carefully. "Just a few weeks," he said. "I'll stay somewhere else. Clear my head." It sounded temporary. It sounded harmless. So I nodded slowly. But later that night, lying alone in our bedroom, a strange thought kept circling my mind. If someone truly loved you, why would they need distance from you to remember it? Alistair moved out 3 days later. He said he rented a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place to think. He promised it was temporary. "I'll still call," he said. "I'll visit." And, at first, he did. The first week he checked in every evening. The second week every few days. By the third week, the calls became shorter. Then one night, he didn't call at all. When I asked about it the next day, he simply said he fell asleep early. I told myself not to overreact. People need space sometimes. But something about the way his voice sounded had changed. It felt rehearsed. Had he already made a decision about us? Or was something else happening while he was thinking? The message from my neighbor arrived on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. I almost ignored it, but the photo preview caught my attention. A moving truck, boxes, furniture. At first I assumed she sent it by mistake. Then I opened the image, and my breath stopped. Standing beside the truck was Alistair. There was no doubt. He wore the same navy coat he had taken when he moved out. He was talking to two movers while pointing toward the front door of a white house. Behind him stood a woman. She held a clipboard and a set of keys. Her posture was relaxed. Comfortable. Too comfortable. My neighbor wrote again. I drove past and thought it looked like him. Is he moving? That question sat on the screen. Moving? But Alistair had already moved. Hadn't he? I zoomed in on the photo. Something inside me tightened. One of the boxes the movers carried had a label written in my handwriting. Kitchen glassware. That was from our house. Why would our things be inside that truck? Had Alistair come back while I was away and taken them? The woman beside him leaned closer in the photo. And suddenly I recognized her. Her name was Maribel Ashcroft. She worked with Alistair's foundation. We had met twice at fundraising events. She always seemed polite, professional. So, why was she standing beside my husband while our furniture went into a new house? And why did she have keys? I stared at the photo for almost an hour. My mind kept offering small explanations. Maybe he was helping her move. Maybe the furniture belonged to the foundation. Maybe. But every explanation sounded weaker than the last. Finally, I grabbed my coat and keys. If that house existed, I needed to see it myself. The drive across town felt longer than usual. When I turned onto the street from the photo, my heart began beating faster. And there it was. The White House. The moving truck was still parked outside. And standing beside it was my husband. I parked half a block away. From that distance, they didn't notice me. Two movers carried a couch through the front door. My couch. The one Alistair and I bought 5 years earlier. Maribel stood beside him laughing about something. Then she placed a hand lightly on his arm. Not like a colleague. Not like a friend. Like someone who belonged there. And suddenly a question struck me. If Alistair was supposed to be living in a small apartment, why was he moving into a house? And why was another woman holding the keys? I stayed in the car for nearly 30 minutes. Watching. Observing. Trying to understand what I was seeing. Alistair directed the movers like someone who knew exactly where everything should go. Kitchen boxes. Bedroom furniture. Even the painting from our hallway. He had taken so many things from our home. But when had he packed them? Had he done it quietly during the times I was away? Or had he planned this long before he ever said the words, "I need space"? And if that was true, then what exactly had our marriage meant to him during those months? That evening Alistair called me. "Hello, Elara," he said calmly. "How are you doing?" I almost laughed. How was I doing? Watching my husband move into another house with another woman. But I kept my voice steady. "I'm fine. How's the apartment?" I asked casually. "It's quiet," he said. "Good for thinking." Thinking. That word again. Did he realize how easily lies can unravel? Did he think no one would ever see him? Instead of confronting him immediately, I decided to wait. Why rush? If Alistair believed his secret was safe, he would continue revealing more. Over the next week, I quietly gathered information. The house he moved into was recently purchased. The buyer's name surprised me. It wasn't Alistair. It was Maribel. But something else stood out. The down payment came from a bank account I recognized. A joint account. Our joint account. Which meant something very interesting. Alistair hadn't just moved on. He had financed his new life with my money. That discovery changed everything. At first I felt anger. But anger fades quickly. Strategy lasts longer. If Alistair believed he could quietly build a new life while I remained unaware, then perhaps it was time to let him keep believing that. Just a little longer. Would he grow careless? Would he reveal more than he intended? Sometimes the most powerful move in a conflict is silence. 2 weeks later, Alistair asked to meet. "I think we should talk about the future," he said. The future. Such a calm word for such a complicated situation. We met at a quiet cafe. He looked relaxed, almost relieved. "Elara," he began carefully, "I think it might be best if we consider separating." Separating. I nodded slowly. "And where will you live?" I asked. He hesitated. "I might stay in the apartment a while." The apartment again. The invisible apartment. How long did he think that story would survive? I slid my phone across the table. The photo from the neighbor filled the screen. The moving truck. The White House. Him. Maribel. His expression changed instantly. He stared at the image as if the air had vanished from the room. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. That's not the important question, I said. The important question is, how long were you planning this? For the first time since I met him, Alistair looked unsure. I can explain, he said. Can people really explain betrayal? Or do they only explain how they got caught? He tried to describe it as complicated. A relationship that developed unexpectedly. A mistake. A misunderstanding. But the evidence didn't look accidental. It looked carefully planned. I placed another document on the table. Bank transfers. Large ones. From our joint account. To Maribel's house, I said quietly. Alistair's face turned pale. Did you think I would never check? He sat silently for several seconds. Not the calm, composed silence I was used to, but something heavier. Something uncertain. Then he exhaled slowly. Elara, this doesn't have to become ugly. Ugly? That word lingered between us. I leaned back slightly, studying him. Ugly for who? I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Was he worried about me? Or about himself? About his image? His reputation? His carefully built identity as the generous man everyone admired? I'm trying to protect both of us, he finally said. Protect. Another word people use when they're already too late. I folded my hands on the table. You moved into a house with another woman, I said calmly. You used our money to pay for it. You lied about where you were living. I paused, letting each truth settle. And now you're asking me not to make it ugly? He shifted in his seat. I didn't plan for things to happen like this. That made me wonder. When did he plan it? Before the space? Before the distance? Or long before that? Because nothing about this felt sudden. It felt constructed. Carefully. Quietly. And now, for the first time, it was unraveling. The divorce process began shortly after. But it didn't begin loudly. There were no dramatic confrontations. No shouting matches. Just documents. Records. Facts. And something about facts is very simple. They don't bend. Alistair entered the process with the same confidence he carried into everything else. Measured tone. Controlled responses. Polished explanations. He believed he could navigate this the way he navigated public perception. But a courtroom isn't a charity gala. And truth isn't impressed by a reputation. Mr. Rowan, the attorney said during one session, can you explain these transfers? The numbers spoke clearly. Large amounts. Repeated patterns. Dates that aligned perfectly with Maribel's property purchase. He adjusted in his seat. They were investments, he said. Investments. In what? A house he never told his wife about? A life he quietly stepped into while pretending to reflect? The more he explained, the less his story made sense. Within months, the situation shifted in a way even he didn't expect. Because once financial records are opened, they don't just show one truth. They show all of them. Additional transfers surfaced. Smaller ones at first, then larger. Expenses tied to the house. Renovations. Furniture. Utilities. Everything traced back to accounts that carried both our names. Were these authorized? The court asked. Authorized. Such a simple word. And yet it carried everything. Because authorization implies agreement. And I had never agreed to any of it. The narrative he built, quiet, controlled, hidden, was now being examined from every angle. And, for the first time, he wasn't directing the outcome. Maribel's situation became complicated quickly, because the house she stood in so confidently was no longer stable. Ownership was questioned. Funding was challenged. And suddenly, the place that once looked like a new beginning became a liability. I heard about it from mutual acquaintances. Whispers at first, then clearer details. She didn't know it would turn out like this, someone said. Didn't she? Or did she believe the version of the story that suited her? Because that's the thing about shared secrets. They feel strong in the dark, but fragile in the light. One afternoon, I drove past the White House again. The same eucalyptus trees stood tall. The same driveway. but something had changed.
A sign.
For sale. I slowed the car slightly, and for a moment I wondered, how quickly does something fall apart when it was never built on truth? The windows were closed. No movement inside. No laughter. No life. Just stillness. And silence. The stories about them became clearer over time. Arguments. Frequent.
Loud.
Unresolved. Neighbors noticed. Doors closing sharply. Voices raised late at night. Strange, isn't it? A relationship that begins in secrecy often struggles with honesty. Because if someone could lie with you, what stops them from lying to you? Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild itself automatically. It questions everything. Every word. Every absence. Every explanation. And eventually, it wears people down. Months later, Alistair called again. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity can be quiet and persistent. Elara, he said. His voice sounded different. Not confident. Not composed. Just tired. I made mistakes. Mistakes. I let the word sit for a moment. Because what defines a mistake? Something accidental? Or something repeated? Something hidden? Something planned? Yes, I replied calmly. You did. He tried to explain again. Not the way he had before. This time, there was less structure. Less control. More pauses. I thought I could manage everything, he admitted. Manage. That word again. As if life were something to organize instead of live honestly. I didn't think it would go this far. How far is too far? The first lie? The second? Or the moment everything collapses? By then, my life had already shifted. Not dramatically, but steadily. Quiet mornings. Clear decisions. No confusion. No second-guessing. And something else I hadn't expected.
Peace.
Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. The final settlement came months later. The court ruled clearly. The misused funds, the hidden transfers, the financial deception, all accounted for, all corrected. The outcome wasn't just legal. It was symbolic, because for the first time, he couldn't adjust the narrative. Maribel left the house shortly after. I heard she moved out quietly. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. And that made me wonder. Did she leave because of him? Or because of what the situation revealed? Because sometimes, it's not the person that changes your mind. It's the truth. Alistair, on the other hand, stayed in the city, but not in the same way. His reputation shifted. Not overnight, but gradually. People asked questions. Donors hesitated. Colleagues observed more closely. And the image he once carried so easily became something he had to defend. We never reconciled, not even briefly, because reconciliation requires something specific. Not regret, not explanation, but transformation. And Alistair never truly changed. He adjusted. He explained. He managed. But he never transformed. The last time I saw him, he looked older. Not in years, but in weight. The kind that comes from carrying consequences. Elara, he said quietly. I nodded. No anger. No bitterness. Just distance. Some distances are meant to stay. Driving home that day, I realized something important. The story never began with a photo. It began long before that. In the small shifts, the quiet distance, the subtle changes we often ignore, because we want to believe everything is still intact. But truth doesn't disappear. It waits, patiently, until something reveals it. A message, a detail, a moment, or sometimes a single photo. Looking back, I no longer felt anger, only understanding, because what happened didn't just show me who Alistair was. It showed me who I was. Someone who noticed, someone who questioned, someone who didn't accept being dismissed. And that changed everything. Because once you see clearly, you don't go back to guessing. Sometimes people think the ending of a story is the most important part. But it's not. The most important part is what you carry forward. And what I carried forward was simple. Truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly. In a photo, in a detail, in a moment you almost ignore. But when you see it, you have a choice. Look away, or follow it. I chose to follow it, and it led me exactly where I needed to be. I thought the story had ended with the court ruling, with the silence, with the distance that finally felt permanent. But closure has a way of arriving in layers, quiet at first, then undeniable. It started with an email, not from Alistair, not from anyone I recognized. The subject line was simple. You deserve to know the rest. For a moment, I considered deleting it. Moving on had been peaceful,
Clean.
intentional, but something about those words, the rest, felt unfinished. Inside the email was a single attachment. No message. No explanation. Just a file. I hesitated before opening it, because instinct is a strange thing. Sometimes it protects you. Sometimes it warns you. And sometimes it pushes you forward. I clicked. The document was a series of internal financial reports from Alistair's foundation. Detailed.
Precise.
Dates, transfers, allocations. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Numbers, accounts, donations. Then I noticed a pattern. Certain funds, large ones, were being redirected. Not to projects. Not to charities. To shell accounts. Accounts that didn't exist publicly. And then I saw a name appear repeatedly. Maribel wasn't the only one involved. There was another. Someone higher. Someone closer to the foundation's core. My chest tightened slightly. Because if this was true, then the story I thought had ended wasn't just about betrayal in a marriage. It was about something much bigger. And whoever sent this email wasn't trying to reopen the past. They were trying to expose the truth. I spent the next 2 days going through every page of the document.
Slowly. Carefully.
Patterns don't lie. The same accounts appeared again and again. Funds moved in cycles, donation, transfer, disappearance. It was subtle, clever, designed to avoid attention. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. And then I found the name that changed everything. Elias Barn, a senior financial advisor within the foundation. Someone I had met multiple times over the years. Quiet.
Precise.
Invisible in the way numbers people often are. But according to the documents, he wasn't invisible at all. He was orchestrating everything. Alistair's transfers. The house. Even Maribel's involvement. It wasn't random. It was structured. Suddenly, Alistair's behavior began to look different. Not excused. Never excused. But influenced. Directed. Had he been acting alone? Or had he been pulled into something he believed he could control? The question lingered. Because if Elias Varn had manipulated the financial structure of the foundation, then Alistair might not have been the architect. He might have been the face. And faces are replaceable. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. If this information became public, it wouldn't just damage reputations. It would dismantle everything the foundation stood for. And suddenly, the email made sense. You deserve to know the rest. Not because I was his ex-wife, but because I had unknowingly been connected to something far deeper than I realized. And now, I had a choice again. Ignore it, or follow it. I didn't go to the authorities immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood something important. Information is power. But timing is everything. Instead, I requested a meeting. Not with Alistair. With Elias Varn. He agreed surprisingly quickly. We met in a quiet office downtown. Neutral space. No connections to the foundation. He walked in with the same calm demeanor I remembered. Measured steps. Controlled expression. Elara, he said politely. This is unexpected. Is it? I replied. I placed a printed copy of the financial records on the table. For the first time, something shifted in his eyes. Not panic. Recognition. You've been very busy, I added quietly. He didn't deny it. That was the first thing I noticed. Instead, he sat down slowly and folded his hands. You're more observant than I gave you credit for, he said. That confirmed everything. This wasn't just Alistair. I continued. No, he said simply. The honesty was unsettling. How long? I asked. Years. The word landed heavier than anything else. Years. Which meant the foundation, the one built on generosity, trust, impact, had been quietly bleeding resources under his control. And Alistair? Elias tilted his head slightly. He was useful. Useful. Not partner. Not mastermind. Just useful. That told me everything I needed to know. Alistair hadn't just betrayed me. He had been part of something much larger. Whether he realized it fully or not, he had stepped into a system that was already in motion. And now, it was unraveling. I expected resistance, denial, excuses, deflection. But Elias surprised me. You're wondering why I didn't stop you, he said calmly. I didn't respond, because I was wondering something else entirely. Why had he let me find this? Because it was already ending, he continued. That made me pause. What do you mean? He leaned back slightly. Systems like this don't collapse from the outside, he said. They collapse from pressure within. Pressure. And you, he added, accelerated it. That realization settled slowly. The divorce. The investigation. The exposure of financial transfers. It hadn't just affected Alistair. It had disrupted the entire structure Elias had built. You could have stopped it, I said. No, he replied. I could have delayed it. There was a difference. A significant one. Then why meet me? He smiled faintly. Because you're the only variable I didn't account for. That was the first time I felt something close to unease. Not fear, but awareness. This wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about consequences. For everyone involved. And what happens now? I asked. Elias stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. Now, he said. He glanced at the documents on the table. Now the truth does what it always does. And that is. He looked at me directly. It spreads. The investigation became public 3 weeks later. Not quietly. Not gradually.
Suddenly.
Headlines. Reports. Questions. The foundation was placed under immediate review. Accounts were frozen. Audits launched. Names surfaced. Including his. Including Elias Varn. And including, inevitably, Alistair Rowan. But this time, the narrative wasn't his to control. The story had outgrown him. I watched it unfold from a distance. Not involved. Not affected in the way I once would have been. Because something inside me had already shifted long before this. Closure hadn't come from the court. Or the house. Or even the truth about Maribel. It came from understanding. Understanding that betrayal is rarely isolated. It exists in layers. In systems. In choices that connect long before they reveal themselves. Alistair called once more. I didn't answer. Not out of anger. Not out of avoidance. But because there was nothing left to say. Some endings don't need conversations. They just need distance. And as I stood by the window that evening, watching the quiet rhythm of the city continue as if nothing had changed, I realized something final. The story didn't end with exposure. It ended with clarity. Because in the end, the most powerful thing isn't revenge. It isn't justice. It's seeing the truth for what it is. And choosing not to be part of the lie anymore.